So one of the issues that it just comes up over and over when we're talking to people is how to deal with societal and political issues in the workplace. Obviously, there's the situation in the Middle East, which leaders have been struggling to grapple with, and there's a really contentious election here at home. And so I want to call up Richard Edelman, coming up here. Thank you. He's the CEO of Edelman, and here we go, right here.
Oh, okay.
And to talk about the best practices for organizations in this time. And Richard's firm works with clients including Unilever, Harvard University, Starbucks, United Airlines, and other organizations that are navigating these waters. And also, Edelman is home to the Trust Barometer, which is an important part of research on the relationship of workers to companies that actually looks very directly at these issues. So Richard, thank you for spending a few minutes with us here. And maybe we start by the sort of foundational context, which is around the relationship between workers and employers, the situation of trust that will lead us into this question of societal and political issues.
I'm paying attention over here, don't worry. I'll turn my head. Okay, so let's start with 3 or 4 foundational points. The mass-class divide. The bottom quartile and the top quartile have fundamentally different views of trust in institutions. So bottom quartile doesn't trust institutions because they've seen the results of 2008. Their income's flatlined, rich people's go up. They're like, why? And second point, that business has emerged as the most trusted institution. And it's particularly in my employer. Trust is local. It's generalized business ahead of government, but it's especially in my employer, my CEO, my company publication. The third is the battle for truth. No one believes what they read, hear, or see. They believe it if they see it personally. So all of these things matter. Now, you ask about the employees. There's a mass-class divide within the workplace. This is fundamental. It is bigger than the mass-class divide in the general population. It is 2x that divide. So the person who is the blue collar versus the person sitting at the desk, the white collar, it is 32 points delta on trust in institutions. Those people at the bottom quartile who are working the docks, as a joke for the dock workers who weren't working last week but are working this week, they're back. 19% trust the CEO. 19.
Wow.
It's a 1/3 of what the executive class trust. So in short, there's a real problem of the have and have not in the workplace.
Yeah.
And the idea that companies would back off of diversity, equity, inclusion, or sustainability, or all these things that they've made promises for in the last 4 or 5 years is simply self-destructive. Why? Because employees are going to stay with your company, promote your company, recommend your company at a 2-to-1 rate if they believe that you are standing up for those issues. And so if you care about your employees, you care about those issues.
Yeah, so you're stepping us now into this question of societal and political issues. And one thing that I've heard recently is a lot of companies are saying, like, we're just not going to say anything about, it's only trouble for us. We're going to take a neutral philosophy and we're going to keep ourselves out of this. I'm sure, you're talking to folks all the time who have that instinct. And what is the framework that you're recommending for your clients and for folks in the room for approaching these issues?
Does it have something to do with your business? Does it relate to supply chain? Does it relate to hiring? Does it relate to pricing, sourcing? All these things are within your control and therefore within your responsibility. If it's simply for purpose, don't do it. If it's for the idea that it makes my business better, make that argument. That's the simple frame to use. And so, it's not bad for Republicans at all. It's almost as good for Republicans as for Democrats. Republicans want business to succeed. It's not like Republicans are anti-business. They may be anti-trade. But
well, so let's talk about like some of the. So I missed that.
These are punchlines.
Let's talk about like specific issues. So basically what you're saying, and I think what you've said is be careful on politics, do not get into politics. Your brands will suffer if you're quoted correctly, but be prepared to express humanity. And so some of the issues like really concretely that people are dealing with reproductive rights and kind of related issues is one of them. We have the elections. We have the war in Gaza and everything around there. How do you define what is related to your business in the context of some of those issues, and how should people think about speaking out on them?
So I don't know what anybody else did yesterday, but I had an open convening and I spoke for 5 minutes about October 7th, and those who wanted to join joined, and we had some people from the Middle East and we had some people who are Jewish, and I said what I had to say, but I said it to my people. I didn't say it, to the Wall Street Journal. And I think that is indicative of what you should do on reproductive rights, for instance. You should make sure that you are expressing to your employees your views and hopefully your commitment to making sure women have access to abortion if they need it, and in Illinois as opposed to Texas or wherever they have to get to. I don't think you have the license to play in a highly politicized moment in a political year in a public sphere.
Yeah.
Talk to your people. Don't become a public advocate until you're a retired CEO like Ken Frazier and you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And he is. He feels very liberated. It's nice. But notice,
you're making the distinction between public communication, so you talking to your staff versus going on doing an interview with the Wall Street Journal. But even that is actually pretty challenging. I remember about 9 months or so ago talking to a senior executive at a pretty big kind of household name company, and he was saying, like, I spend like half of my time trying to figure out how to communicate around the Middle East right now, because we have employees who are on all sides of everything here. And he said, I think I've done a good job because half of the company hates me, and he's actually 100% of the company hates me. And that was his like declaration of victory. He felt like he'd found such a middle road that nobody was satisfied with how he was communicating about it. And so I guess the question for you is just internally, how do you navigate something? You've made the distinction between external and internal. Workers have expectations of their employers. How do you deal with something like that internally?
So the first is be a human being. If you're Jewish and you have kids and you say, I didn't sleep for 2 months and all I could see was my daughters at that rave being murdered, that's human. But if you have Middle East operations, you better go and sit with those people too and listen to their stories. I went to KSA, I listened to my Saudi employees, and one of them said 20 people died in a church last week in Gaza, and I said, I mourn those people too.
Yeah.
And we send exactly the same amount of money to the Ambulance Society in Israel and to the Red Crescent in the Middle East. And, you have to do both.
Yeah.
But you have to go. You cannot do this stuff remote. You have to sit with people.
Yeah.
And listen and have them cry, and you cry too if you feel so moved.
Are there any other lessons from the last year? Has been so intense, not to reduce it the human tragedy to this dimension, but it is.
Well, I think
question.
Let's use Harvard as an example. So she was a new person in the job. Claudine Gay had the job for a month, and stuff happened, and 35 groups stood up and spoke up on behalf of the Palestinians as opposed to what happened on October 7th. And then Harvard was playing from behind and she was always trying to catch up. I mean, the speed with which you have to react and the intuition to act as opposed to be conservative, I think is really important. Your time is short. It's not, we can take 24 and see how this plays. Otherwise, it's already in the spin cycle that you don't care.
Yeah.
And that's not true in this case. She was falsely depicted, but was always playing defense after that. And don't be guided by your lawyers. I'm sure there are lawyers in here. But
we love lawyers.
I'm sure you do. And I love them too. But every interaction, especially in the public sphere, has to be based on humanity and person to person. And all she had to say in the testimony in front of Stefanik, who wanted to make her look bad, was, you think I don't understand discrimination? You must be joking.
Yeah.
You got privilege with whatever. I earned it. And don't tell me that I don't deserve to be in this place. Fight back.
That's what you
Don't be
said.
cowed by legislators who are trying to beat you up.
Yeah.
It's show business, folks. Haven't you seen who and how people are running for president?
Yeah. And on that topic, so here we are, less than a month away, and I think what you said is don't stick your neck out on politics. But what we do know is that politics and this election and the stress and the conversations and the polarization and everything else, we do know that from research that is present in the workplace because it's present throughout everything. So how do you advise leaders, in the home stretch here to communicate around, think about the politics in the U.S. election cycle?
One of the shocking findings of our employee trust study is the workplace is the one safe place people feel they can actually talk about politics. They can't do it across the fence anymore with the neighbors.
Yeah.
They don't have any idea what's going to happen. There's no sanction in the neighborhood anymore.
The pickleball courts have gotten very violent in California, I understand.
A lot of putaways. Anyway, so tell people to vote. That's the most important thing. Give them time off to vote.
Yeah.
Give them even fact sheets that say, look, this is a composite from ChatGPT of, all sorts of things. Here's the views on Ukraine. Here's the differences on choice. Whatever it is, give people facts, let them make their own calls, avoid any such and so for Harris for president. Avoid those lists. You should do what you do personally.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually the toolkit for employers is broader than just politics. It's civic engagement written broadly, and we've covered efforts at Microsoft and elsewhere to actually give that toolkit to their
Kevin,
employees.
I know I'm looking at the clock. There's one thing I want to mention before I get off the stage. It's a message point. I'm in PR.
Thank you.
Diversity and inclusion. Business has to stand its ground. Listen carefully. Business has lost ground in the last 3 years. Government is now the most trusted institution about dealing with race. And yet, government is not delivering. Therefore, business, and when people deliver on DE&I promises, there's a doubling of trust of the employee base. The biggest drop is African Americans, second biggest drop is Asians. They feel just not protected. So I got my message in.
Great. Richard, thank you so much for sharing your insights here. I really appreciate it. Thank you.